been exploring some foreign games and or foreign games that have been translated rather, and just wanted to talk a little bit about why foreign games, foreign-based games, uh, in my opinion, are better games. Why they're more equipped to handle uh, the marketplace, and why they're kind of making a bigger impact than a lot of U.S. based games. Um, and why a lot of U.S. based game companies are kind of missing the mark. What they're missing, what they're kind of missing from the front end of uh, the hobby. And this is going to include some kind of drama llama stuff, but it's not going to be focused on. I just want to make it clear that there is a lot of drama llama stuff that goes on around U.S. based companies, but what I'm going to say is going to make a lot of sense in the end. I think so. Please, 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 please watch the end, guys. Um, so when you're talking about foreign-based games, I'm talking about companies like Free Liga. I'm talking about uh, the producers of games like I can't remember the name of the company right now that does Lex Arcana. You've got Japanese-based games right now starting to break into the market that are supported by companies. Although I think Promethean is U.S. based, but you've got companies like Falcom um, starting to produce tabletops. Um, you know, you've got Sword World being translated. Goblin Slayer was finally translated. You have Octopath Traveler is being translated in October. It comes out in October. Um, so you have all these game companies all over the world that are producing games that are being translated into English that are really good games. They're actually superb games. If you're not aware of how much I love Lex Arcana is actually one of my favorite games that I don't ever get to play because it's really hard to find people for. Um, but Lex Arcana is a great game. Anima Beyond Fantasy was a good game. Complicated, crunchy, yes, it's still a good game. um, you know, all these companies exist, and the biggest one right now, of course, is Free Liga, um, Free League, whatever you want to call them. Um, they're definitely the big dog in the foreign market because their games are originally published in Swedish and then translated into multiple languages. But so when you look at those companies, you see how they're doing, and a lot of them have done well over the years, um, at least in the small press, small market. Um, Lex Arcana actually for example, has a pretty good reputation among the people who play it. People who know about it has a pretty good reputation. All of that being said, guys, um, they do a couple of things that U.S. companies just don't do. And I'm going to tell you what those big things are, and I'm going to explain them. And then hopefully, like I said, you guys will understand why all this stuff matters to me, anyways, as a creator who focuses on the more esoteric and small press. Um, so first thing they do is they produce games for game's sake. Um, and what I mean by that is they only want to produce good games. They are not interested in producing slop. They are not producing superfluous supplements. They are not producing mass amounts of books. They are not trying to sell you uh, ridiculous amounts of money worth of product. They are selling you a game. There is a reason most free league games, in particular, because I have a lot of experience with them, can be run out of 1 to 2 books for a total of about $100 because their core books are around 60, their splat books are about 40. So around $100 you can play a free league game generally, sometimes less. Um, you know, it, and that's just the truth of that game. Anima, when it came out, it's no longer true with Anima because it's out of print and it's a little more expensive to buy. It's around $120 right now for the core book, $120 for the core book. But you could run Anima straight out of that core book when it first came out for $60, $50. Lex Arcana can be run purely out of the core book. You do not have to pick up another splat for $50. And then when you look at how these games are produced, they're not putting out 12 different supplements a year, 10 different supplements a year, like some companies are, like a lot of American companies are in particular. D&D, although D&D, to be fair to WotC, is beginning to roll that back a little bit. But for a long time, D&D was producing, 8, 10, 12 supplements a year. Um, and it was expensive. Uh, Paizo produces untold numbers of supplements if you include the Avenger Pass and everything else. And then they're running two major game lines. You know, Chaosium produces quite a few. They don't produce quite as much as Botsy. I think they produce about 4 or 5 supplements a year. Um, you know, Evil Hat produces tons of product, considering how small Evil Hat actually is. Um, a lot of these game companies are producing a lot of materials for profit margin. Honestly, is what it comes down to. They're trying to create a profit margin, and it's a shame that they are that way, because you can produce a great game without needing to produce 500 books, 300 books. 3.5 was the epitome of that. But if you look at 5th/5.5 D&D, there are unholy amounts of books for that game. So if you're a collector and you like to have a whole line, good luck. Unless you have a lot of money, good luck. Whereas, like I said, with Free League, you can get every book. I have every book for One Ring, and I think I've spent less than $300. I have every book for Forbidden Lands. I've spent less than $200 on it, or 250, somewhere in that range. I have every book for Fabiola Ultima, which is Italian, by the way. I've spent around $200. Um, and they're not really, they're producing maybe a book a year, maybe 2 books a year. And it works. So the idea that these companies are producing games for game's sake is that they're producing what matters. They're producing new roles. They're producing functional rules. They're producing products that people actually want or may need for their games. A great example would be the One Ring. The One Ring doesn't produce books just to have more books out. Every book they've produced expands and creates new opportunities to play in different parts of Middle Earth and things like that. Their new book is the Elf, or not the Elf Realms, Saruman. It's around Rohan and Isengard, which I have that on pre-order. I gotta go pick that up when I can. It actually came in yesterday, so I'm super excited about it. But that's how they produce for the One Ring. Books like Mutant Year Zero. None of the books in the Mutant Year Zero line are superfluous. They all add something to the game. And they've realistically, Mutant Year Zero has been out for years, and they really don't have that many books for it. I think the main line has 6 or 7, and then you have Gene Lab Alpha has a couple, and I think those are the only 2 that really have multiple books. So total Mutant Year Zero complete, if you buy everything, is like 15 books. And it's been around since, in English, this newest edition's been around since I think 2010, 2012. So about 15 years, give or take. It only has 15 books, give or take. I'd have to look at the list to know for sure, but I think it has about 15 books, 15 or 18 books, something like that. And why can't D&D do that? Why can't Chaosium do that? Why can't more companies do that? Because it goes into this next part, guys. So first off, like I said, these companies are producing games for game's sake. The second thing they're not doing, and this is what they are doing, this is what they're not doing. They're not creating lifestyle brands around their games. A lot of these big name companies are trying to create little brands, not games. D&D is the most egregious example, of course, because we all know how they are. I mean, they produce the novels, which isn't bad, by the way. I love some of the D&D novels, but they produce novels, they produce cookbooks, they produce, I mean, they've gone as far as doing like Halloween costumes, for God's sake. They produce jewelry, official jewelry, miniatures, dice sets, and they do all of that, and they are trying to pump the idea that D&D is more than a hobby. It's part of your life. And guys, I'm going to say this as an enthusiast. Please understand this. Nothing in role playing is so important to me that it has to be a part of my life, like a big part of my life. Nothing. If it comes down to I can game or I can do something important, guess what I'm doing? Hate to be that guy. The life is just too busy and too important to me for that. So these big foreign companies, like I said, they don't produce lifestyle brands. They produce games. Now, that is not to say in any capacity that you cannot produce, things like jewelry and things like that, and still have a game. Um, but a lot of these foreign-based game companies, if things like that get produced, they're not produced by the company. They're produced by fans who sometimes get the rights, sometimes don't, whatever. And most of the companies don't care as long as you're not infringing on their copyright. They just don't care. Um, you know, so I'm sure there are people that have produced Dragon Bane, jewelry, necklaces, somewhere, but nobody's doing it as part of the company's product line. And because they're not focusing on the game for the game's sake, and they're trying to make it into a lifestyle, they have completely missed the mark. And now you have this game company that is nothing but a money sink. And foreign companies just don't do that. They just don't do it. They don't. They don't FAFO with it because one, it's a money sink for them too. But two, they understand that the hobbyist is not in the hobby for art pieces and novels and everything else. A lot of hobbyists don't care about that stuff. Um, a lot of them, they just don't. They just don't care about the art book. They don't care about the history of books. They don't care about any of that. With all of that being said, that's not always a bad thing because some of that stuff is interesting. Like I said, it is interesting to read some of the D&D novels, not the newer ones. The newer ones are mostly garbage. Um, but again, not going to delve too deep into all that. But there's a lot of garbage in modern D&D novelizations and stuff. But D&D for years has produced good novels. Has a history of producing good novels, or decent novels. And then you have a long history of some other stuff going on with it. Like I said, the art books can be kind of interesting because there's been some great artists that have worked for Wizards of the Coast. I'd be very intrigued to see a Paizo put out like an art book because Paizo has actually had some fairly decent art over the years. And their art style is pretty unique. They have a kind of nice art style for the most part. So I kind of like their art style. So I'm not opposed to those things. But if that's a core part of your game development line, you're missing the forest for the trees. You're trying to sell people on the idea that your game is more than a game. It's not. It is a game. And when I pick up an RPG book, I don't want to feel like I'm being pressured into engaging with something that is not part of the game. I don't want to feel pressured into engaging with things that don't matter or things that are just money sinks. Um, you know, I don't I don't like buying models for games. I'm a theater of the mind player. If you guys watch my regular games on here, both the games we're in right now for theater of the mind. Yes, we use Roll20 for one of them. There is a very specific reason for that. It's explained to my players. It does all my automation for me, and it saves me a big old fat headache. That's why I use Roll20 for Deadlands. It does a lot of the automation for me. Allows me to do chip draws and all that kind of stuff without having to find an alternative route and all that kind of stuff. But I shouldn't need all of that. I shouldn't need miniatures. Certainly shouldn't need miniatures produced by the company that makes the game. Because I'm going to say this too, pricing goes into the second part of this. Guys, if you've not looked at how much D&D miniatures cost, they're reasonably priced per pack. But the problem is you need a lot of packs. Yeah, they're like $5.99 a pack for 2 or 3 models, I think. 2, I think, for most medium-sized creatures and below, or 2 per pack, and then anything larger than that's 1 per pack, yada, yada, yada. But you need so many of them that $5.99 a pack quickly becomes $200, $300, $400. And then you start getting into some of the things you need for some of these games because of the way they're designed. Oh, you need a miniatures grid. Well, I don't know if you've looked at buying a miniatures map recently. Used to be fairly affordable. They're not as affordable as they used to be. They really aren't. And again, if you're unless you're buying a generic one, if you're buying the D&D or Pathfinder maps, whew, son, they're expensive. $20, $30 a pack for their specific maps. Uh, and it's all on the premise that you're buying into a lifestyle. You're not. You're buying a game. You're not buying into you as a average hobbyist are not buying D&D so that you can buy D&D necklaces and cookbooks. You're just not. That that is a truism that I have found from dealing with people in the hobby regularly. You're not buying into it. So combine those two things, guys, and you have a huge problem right now with Western gaming. Um, and not every Western game design studio, but a lot. In that they're no longer making games for game's sake, and they're attempting to turn it into a lifestyle. And those things just don't. I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to say it as somebody who's been part of this hobby for a long time. Know a lot of people have been a part of this hobby for a long time. Have gained a lot of people who have been part of this hobby for a long time. Uh, it just it's annoying. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, foreign-based companies don't do this stuff. They just don't. They are not invested in the idea that you need a bunch of miniatures and you need a bunch of side product, and you need to make sure that you're buying our product so you can play the game that doesn't come as part of the core set. They just don't do that. They just don't. Um, even games that are foreign that would prefer you to use miniatures, for example, use Reaper. They'll come up. They make standees. Which, by the way, if you're not, side note, if you ever want to get into miniatures for your tabletop because you play a lot of tactical level kind of gaming where you need the tactical grid, standees, guys, super cheap alternative to miniatures. Comparatively, you can get a standee box for most games for around $30, and it comes with a crap ton of the stuff you need. That being said, that's a side note. Standees are really good. Let me see what. Sorry, I got a note on chat here. I apologize. Oh, how's it going there, Trumpet? Didn't see you were in there, bud. I missed your chat there for a second. But yeah. So foreign companies, they just don't do that. And if you're looking for good games, guys, seriously consider some of these foreign translations of games. Really do. Like I said, there are tons of these companies out there. Lots of them are small press. Lots of them are really good games. I mean, I mentioned, I'm going to mention that Free League is a great game. I wish I could remember the company as Alex Arcana. You have Fabula Ultima's done by a foreign company originally. You have, you've got the Sword World game is being done by an American company, but it was originally produced by a Japanese company, and the Japanese company is involved in translation. Goblin Slayer was done by a Japanese company. You have Falcom is directly involved in the production with Promethean Books of Geese, Age of Heroes, and Trails of Destiny. You have, I mean, there's just a couple. And then you have out of print stuff. Like I said, like Anima is the biggest one I know of, but Anima Beyond Fantasy was produced by a Spanish company. Aegon was produced by a French company. I would advise against Aegon, not because it's a bad game, because the only way to get the bestiary is you have to get it in French and translate it. Good luck. That game turned into a mess. Great system, terrible execution. There's one I'm actually not familiar with, Air Trumpet, believe that or not. Konosuba. I'm not surprised that it exists, but I've never actually seen it. Yeah, there you go. I mean, there's tons of them, guys. There are tons of foreign-based games that have been produced. Poland has several game companies that have produced small press games into the U.S. Germany has done it. Dark Eye was originally German. So guys, check out foreign-based games and see what I'm talking about. Really, if you get a chance, check them out. Watch them, read them, and I promise you'll be impressed with a lot of the games. Not every game is a banger. Some of them are kind of very, very much written for the original country they were put in. But Some of these games have existed for years for a reason. Dark Eye is a great example of that. Dark Eye has been around for like 35 years. Dark Eye's been around forever, uh, and I think it's in its fifth edition. I think the edition that I have is fifth. Um, okay, that's interesting. Anime light novel series that was made into an RPG. Okay, which is the same thing that happened with Goblin Slayer. Is was the manga first, and they translated made it into an RPG. Okay, yeah, you just said the same thing I just said. Yeah, very similar mentality. Yeah, but yeah, guys, if you get a chance, check some of these out. Check some of these games out. Don't just take my word for it. Trust your own eyes. Um, these games are well crafted, and like I said, they're games for game's sake. So if that's what you're looking for a game that's written for the game's sake, that is just really good. These games are good. These games are solid. They would not have escaped their home countries if they weren't, for the most part. Um, and I'll tell you where a lot of it comes from is a lot of these games wind up in the hands of Americans. That's pretty cool, Trumpet. Actually, I have the Goblin Slayer RPG sitting next to me, and I have the Octopath Traveler on pre-order, actually. And I picked up the PDF for both East and Trails of Destiny. So there you go. um, but yeah, like I said, there's tons of. But what happened is these games wind up in the hands of a lot of times like U.S. servicemen and people visiting foreign countries. They could speak the language. They came back, translated them for their groups, and then they kind of took off. Some of it just was natural occurrence. Anima, for example, was kind of simultaneously created with the miniatures game. There was some UK based play of the miniatures game because of the EU rules and everything. Uh, little nuance there. But what happened is they translated it originally into English for the UK. It came across the pond, is what happened. Um, and yeah, but these games are great, guys. They really are. I really enjoy them. I will warn anyone who is not aware how quirky some foreign games can be. They can be quirky, but they are very good games. And I just wanted to do this video kind of talking a little bit about foreign based games and what foreign based games offer versus, like I said, mostly versus the big names in the US market. Because I want to make something really clear, guys. There are good US based games manufacturers that do focus on games rather than making lifestyle brands and all that crap. But the problem is they're suffering the same fate as a lot of foreign born game companies that are being brought in. They're being stomped out by the big boys, by the three bigs, which would be Chaosium, Wizards, and uh, Paizo. Um, and I cannot attest enough to just how much it's worth checking out some of these games that were made for other countries. Um, because as I've gone through the years, I didn't realize it until recently how many games I have that were made by other countries. But either way, guys, I would love to hear your thoughts, your experiences. Ear Trumpet mentioned a good one, apparently a decent one that I've never heard of. If you've got a game that you played that is made by a foreign company that you really love, please leave it in the comments. Tell me what it's about, whatever, because there's a chance I may not have heard of it. Because I'm just now kind of exploring that market a little bit more. Uh, and as always, guys, follow the three rules: no ad hominems, no picking fights, and don't leave college dissertations. Other than that, guys, I'm happy to hear your comments, questions, concerns, thoughts. And as always,